Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Broken Bookshelf. Today I'm going to be reviewing the sequel of a book that I've already posted the review to. The first one was called Cry Silent Tears, and this one is called Cry Myself to Sleep, and it's by Jo Peters. The cover, I would say, looks just as horrific as the first one, but I found with this one that was a little bit misleading. I was sort of wondering what was going to be happening because there's still a child on the cover, so I thought it was going to be more details about his childhood life, but the first book ended with him running away from home, so I wasn't sure where this book was going to go, if he was going to backtrack or what, but it does turn out that the cover was misleading. This book is just like basically the end of his story. It starts right after he trashes his mother's house as a way to sort of get a little bit of revenge on her. So he leaves home and he is still this kid who missed 3 years of his life because he was put in the cellar, so he's still developmentally behind. He's never had proper parental figures in his life to show him how to live properly. So this book is really interesting. It's just more about his journey finding himself in the real world. So yeah, it starts with him hitchhiking to Charing Cross, which apparently is like a really good place for homeless people to go. There's lots of other homeless people there. You can easily get into like a crew or whatever. Nobody will stop for him, and he's getting really frustrated. It's nighttime. He's been standing out there all day long. He's constantly panicked and terrified that his mom is gonna find him or the police are gonna find him and take him back. He's about to give up, but this taxi pulls up. This guy, it turns out his name is Mohammed, he asks if he's okay, and he tells him, like, I'm trying to get to Charing Cross, I don't have any money. And Mohammed is like, well, I can maybe give you a ride to the bus station. He's really wary to get into the car with this guy because nobody has ever shown him in the past any reason to trust people, especially what happened with like Uncle Doug. He's really wary of getting into strange cars with strange men, but he decides, like, this guy seems like he's legitimately being really nice, so I'll do it. So he got in and the guy gave him a ride to the bus station, and they told him, like, oh, you just missed the bus. He just was like, hey, look, I don't want to give the wrong impression, but I have a couch if you want to crash on it for the night, and I'll give you a meal, like, just come with me and I'll get you safely back to the bus stop in the morning. Joe decides to trust him because he legitimately seems like he's trying to help, and it ended up being a good choice. They went home and it was actually this really cool scene where they went to Mohammed's house and Mohammed played like Elvis records and he was dancing around and singing to them and making Joe laugh. It was just really refreshing to see because it was just this really legitimately innocent moment within the context of this abusive, disturbing life that Joe has had. This is like one of the first moments we've seen of just some innocent fun and just innocent friendship being shared. He ends up putting on a song that reminded Joe of his dad, which actually got Joe really emotional. And so they end up connecting. And it's one of those things, I think we all have people like this in our lives where they change something in us even if we don't see them on a consistent basis, or even if we never see them again. It was probably Joe's first encounter with somebody who legitimately just didn't want anything back from him. He just wanted to offer him friendship and help. Yeah, Mohammed helps him out and takes him back to the bus stop, and he makes his way to Charing Cross. He's actually really excited to live homeless because, like, compared to his life before, living with his mom and being abused, like, homelessness sounds like freedom to him. Reading this book, it's one of those things that just wakes you up to just different perspectives in life and to how much I have, knowing that you're safe and you've always been safe. He's sort of like just wandering around, wondering what to do and where to start. Like, do I start just knocking on doors? Like, where do I sleep? And he happens to come across this homeless guy begging for money named Jake. Jake sort of ends up offering, like, okay, well, it's hard to get into a crew unless you have an inn. That's something I liked about this book too, was it sort of gave me a new perspective into the homeless community and into the runaway community, how they work together, and just the community aspect of it. I'm not super rich, but I'm definitely not like this. Like, I have no idea what it's like to live on the streets, or even desire to live on the streets, because I'm running away from something that's even more terrifying. So this Jake guy, he explained that, like, okay, well, We tend to run in cliques because it's safer that way, but the problem is like it's hard to get into a group unless you have an in. So he offered to be the in for Joe. The leader of this little group is named Jock. They don't have goals to become not homeless in the future. They're completely happy where they're at, and so all their money goes towards drinking, and so unfortunately he sort of gets caught up in that. Through this group, we're introduced to another unfortunate character in the story called Max. Max is like super weird. Like he pulls up in like this expensive car like while they're walking down the street, and he's like, "Hey Jake," and so Jake goes over to talk to him, and you can tell everybody else in the group is like really pissed that Jake is even like giving this guy the time of day. Jock is like, "You need to stop doing stuff for him, man," and Jake is like, "It's not that easy, man, like I have to do it. You don't understand." We're starting to see like there's something weird about this guy Max. Joe does end up kind of walking alone with Jake one morning, and Max drives up in that stupid Richie Rich car. He gives him a $5 bill. He's like, "Hey buddy, just want to help you out, like take this." It's really interesting that he like fell for this so easily, because he's like learned his whole life not to trust people, but I think he was trying to turn over a new leaf. Like he knows in order to like get his life in order, he just needs to trust people. He gave Max the benefit of the doubt. Then Max is like, "Hey, do you want to come over for lunch to my flat?" And Jake's like, "Yeah, dude, let's go." And as soon as they get there, it's like this big foreboding building. Joe's like, "I don't want to go in. Like, I can't go in." But at this point he sees like, it's like he has no choice, I guess. Like he doesn't just want to like take off running. They kind of get him high. It turns out that Max is a pimp. They would prefer that Joe decide that he wants to make money himself, but if not, they're prepared to force him, which is what ends up happening. They're like, "Hey, do you want to make some money?" He's like, "Yeah, how?" And when they tell him how, he's like, "Absolutely not." The way he grew up, he wants nothing to do with that kind of stuff. Like nothing to do with selling his body, nothing to do with sex that isn't completely consensual, and they just end up forcing him. Like they lock him in a room. Life is showing him that he just cannot trust people. He's freaking out because he's like, "I ran away from home, and like I'm so far from home, and that was so much work just to get to this place where it's just the same thing happening over and over again." Thankfully, this wasn't a big long deal in Joe's life. He was able to escape before he really got too ingrained into the prostitution ring. He decides he needs to leave Charing Cross. Jock takes them to a squat. Joe ends up meeting this girl named Lisa, and Lisa takes a liking to him automatically. So Joe finds this girl that he believes is his soulmate, which is really important for him because that's his goal. Like he wants somebody in his life that truly loves him. And the whole book he talks about like no matter what happiness he finds and what kind of career he gets into, no matter what sort of like good things happen to him, he always references this hole in his life, which is he wants to find a girl that will love him for who he is. He ends up getting her pregnant, and this is probably one of the saddest parts of the book. She won't stop drinking and smoking during her pregnancy, and which is really hard to read about. There's an outreach center. They tell her like over and over, like, you need to see a doctor, you need to get a midwife, like you need to get this pregnancy in order, and she just refuses and refuses. She doesn't want help. Like she just kind of like wings it, like I'm pregnant, whatever, but nothing in her life changes in that aspect. When she's like almost at her due date, she has a miscarriage. They wake up to her just like bleeding all over the place. And Joe, in his innocence, doesn't have a clue what's going on. He and Lisa decide to walk down the street with her just like gushing blood out of her body. This was such a sad scene to me because you see he just legitimately has no idea what's going on. He was actually getting so excited about being a dad. He was excited to love a child in a way that he never got love. It's just so obvious, like reading the book, that he wouldn't have been ready to be a father. Like there's no way that would have worked out very well. But it's still really sad that she had a miscarriage. He's under the impression that the baby is like sick, but the doctors can save it. So when the doctor comes in to talk to him, he's like, "Can I see my baby?" And the doctor's like, "I'm sorry, like she miscarried, like the baby's dead." And he refuses to accept that. He's like, you're a liar and F off. That's the thing about this book, is you're starting to see the consequences of the life that he had to live. In his childhood, you're starting to see the consequences of him being locked in this house and not developing any social skills, not being aware of the world. He's just unaware how to even treat other human beings with respect. Like, he comes out of that house, his mom's house, very racist, because Amani, his mom's boyfriend that raped him for so long, he was a black man. And so he comes out very, very racist toward black men. However, as soon as somebody explained to him that, like, racism isn't cool and not all black guys are like that, he's like, oh, okay. Like, he learns very quickly. But you see, like, just in everything, like, every interaction he has with other human beings, you're seeing how underdeveloped every aspect of his life is. It's a huge struggle for him, and it's really interesting because, like, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, he is a huge brat. Like, he is rude to people. The type of kid who's just like F off to everybody, and anybody who tries to help him, he's just like a huge jerk to. They come across as really entitled or really like spoiled or rude, but reading this book, all of a sudden you're waking up to the fact that, like, whoa, maybe these people in my life are the exact opposite of spoiled and the exact opposite of entitled. Like, this guy was abused his entire life, and that is why he is the way he is. Going in, I'm like, oh man, like, Joe, this guy, he's a jerk, like, he's a douche. But then I had to step back and remember, he is that way because he has been treated so poorly in the past. Like, the things they did to him, and then they would turn around and tell him that it was his fault. Like, it's your fault. Like, remember in the first book how his mom wouldn't let him shower, and then she would tell him, you're a smelly, like, good-for-nothing kid. And so she would make him feel like it was his fault that he was smelly, but in reality, it's like if you allowed him to shower, he wouldn't be smelly. So it was just patterns like that his whole life, of people mistreating him and then turning it around and somehow making it his fault. He's learning how to be a part of society. And so this was a big moment for him, losing the baby. After she delivered the baby, he got to hold it in his arms for a couple minutes, and that was just really sad. Like, picturing holding your dead infant, that's traumatic. He goes home and then he can't sleep, so they end up wandering the streets, and he decides to take his anger out on buildings, and the police come up. So they arrest Jake and Joe. Joe is losing his mind. So again, the caged animal card, he doesn't know how else to react. All he can see is that somebody else is trying to lock him up, just like his mom did. He gives a cop a black eye, and unfortunately the cops end up, like, beating the crap out of him. Jake and the rest of the guys at the squat end up pinning everything on him. He ends up having to go to this maximum security prison. He meets a lot of really interesting figures that help him. That he meets a guy named Matt in the maximum security prison. He's one of the guards. He's constantly trying to help him. So even in prison, he's starting to see, he's starting to trust people. So you're seeing kind of in his life circumstances that are really horrible, but from them, he learns social skills. And that's one thing I find really interesting about the book that I actually wanted to touch on. At no point does Joe ever have a formal issues counselor and confide everything to them and get them to, like, help him walk through his issues. Like, at no point does that happen. So what's really, really cool about this guy, Joe Peters, is that he became a really amazing person just on his own, and learning from his own experiences and learning from his own mistakes in the world. These seemingly ordinary people in his life, they helped him learn how to treat other human beings well. And he learned from his mistakes, like with the police. Like, he saw that when he acted out and threw temper tantrums and acted like a caged animal, that actually didn't help him at all. It's rare that people solely just learn from the world. He's terrified to tell people and ashamed. Like, he feels shame telling people about what he's been through. He was also angry when people tried to pry, because he was like, mind your own business. Like, I don't want to look back at the past, I just want to move forward, because Like, who would want to look back at a past like that once you've escaped it? So the fact that he even put out these books is just really amazing and shows how far he's come in his life. So, he somehow gets admitted to a psych ward. The second psych ward he went to, they actually ended up really helping him. Like the first psych ward, they forced him to do electroshock therapy and all sorts of things like that. So he escaped that one purposefully, but the second one, they just legitimately wanted to help him, and they did. And so at one point they were like, well, your required time is over, the 28 days when your section is over. But we would recommend more treatment, but we would rather you make the decision to stay than us forcing you to. And he really respected that. And so because they didn't force him to stay, he decided to stay for himself. And so that was a big moment in his life. People were offering him a chance to make his own decisions, and he did. He took it and made the mature decision. And so he ended up staying there for a bit, but then he decided he wanted to travel the world. This is actually one of my favorite parts of the book. Because it's just so, it felt so free to me, seeing it from my perspective, somebody that's lived in a house my whole life. It would be hard for me to just like pick up and leave and travel somewhere because I'm like attached to a job or attached to my house. I have cats that I care about and all this kind of stuff, but as a homeless guy, he was just like, I feel like going to France for a while. I feel like going to Greece for a while. I feel like going to Italy for a while. He was just like picking up the odd job here and there, and a part of me sort of envies that life. It really reminds me of Jack from the Titanic, and you have that speech where Jack is having supper with Rose's family. Her mom is making fun of him like for being homeless, and he's like, no, I love it because you don't know like the places you're going to be going tomorrow or the new people you're going to meet, and you get all these experiences because you're not attached to any possessions. And so there's a part of me, like as much as I love all the stuff that I have, obviously, there's a part of me that just wishes that I was more like that. Just pick up and go. So I actually really liked this part, seeing just his freedom, and he's not attached to anyone or anything, so he just packs up and goes. He has a friend named Colin who he lived with. Colin just picks up and goes with him. So here's another free spirit. Like your friend, your roommate is just like, I'm in trouble, we have to go. And he just did it. So I thought that was really interesting. I thought Colin was kind of a cool guy for doing that. And unfortunately, Joe repaid him by stealing his car. What? Like Colin was willing to move with you, and in return for that, he just ditched. Like, that blew my mind. I was literally like, what are you doing? Like, this Colin seems like a really cool friend to have. It's because Joe was still scared of people betraying him. Like, he just kept picturing Colin ditching him in the middle of nowhere. That is just another example of the hazy lenses that he sees the world through. It's just so interesting seeing like moments where he legitimately just didn't, like, it doesn't occur to him that what he did was wrong. Like back in book 1, his mom started teaching him and his brothers to steal things, and so he was just going off of that. Like, it was just a natural way of life to him, which blows our minds. We're like, there's no way he could possibly not know that was wrong. So people always talk about common sense. Things that we think are common sense aren't common sense to other people who are from different walks of life as us. Both books were very interesting, both books were very eye-opening, but this one was just not so burdening and so disturbing and so heavy. You're just seeing the consequences. So the last book was a lot about what people did to him, how people hurt him and abused him and just destroyed him as a human being. This book was more so about things he did to himself as a consequence of that. So this book just has a different atmosphere. It's an easier read because I think it's easier to read about someone being in trouble because of things they do as opposed to reading what somebody else did to like an innocent child. It's still very sad. I want to address something here, would be a good time. I've read some reviews online about the first book, Cry Silent Tears. People either rated it really highly or rated it pretty low. And the people who rated it really low, their reasoning for that was there was no justice served. He never reported his mom or his brothers, so they're probably out there still like hurting people, and he is so selfish for that. and therefore I have to rate this book really low because, like, how dare you, Joe? That's sort of annoying to me. If it was like a fiction novel, then yeah, I would be like, yeah, well, there was no justice done, so what's up with that? Obviously. But this is this guy's real life. Like, he lived through this stuff. He specifies a reason why he didn't go to the police, and I just want to read a little bit of that. He's talking to Matt in the security prison. He gave him some perspective into his life. He gave him a few details about the abuse that he suffered. Matt says, "We need to call the police to investigate your abusers." And he was like, what the heck are you on about? He was horrified. The police were the last people I wanted to be involved with. They'd beaten me up and thrown me into prison. Why would I want to tell them any more about myself? I was scared of them, just as I was scared of every other authority figure. And Matt explains, like, what you've told me is distressing. These people need to be held accountable for what they did. You should be given a caution and let out. They're the ones who should be in prison. And then Joe says, I didn't believe him, and I felt a twinge of panic at the thought that Mom and Amani and the rest of them would find out that I had grasped on them. Had I talked too much? So this is your answer to all those who are like, why didn't you go to the cops? That is so selfish of you. Put yourself in his shoes for just a moment. His entire life, he's been beaten up by authority figures. He's tried to tell people about what he's been going through. He's tried to tell people that his mom was hitting them. Nobody believed him. Nobody would listen. He ended up just getting abused even more. Every time he would try to ask for help or cry for help, his mom ended up finding out, and he would get a huge punishment, like raped and beaten, and to the point where he was almost dead. I just think that's a little pretentious of us to say, sitting here in our privilege, looking down on this guy who suffered so much that he, like, the thought of going to the authority figures made him panic. Like, thinking that he would just be beaten again, that his mom would find him. And that was a fear he carried until the end of these books. We're supposed to be learning that that people who have lived through that kind of stuff carry it with them their entire lives, and what they've learned through their abuse sticks with them. And the fear is one of the hardest emotions to get rid of. Like, it's hard to overcome fear. It takes years and years and years. And so us sitting here unabused, expecting him to go to the cops just so easily is really just, I think that's really unfair. I think instead of going into the books like this wondering like, oh, well, justice could have been served a bit better, I think we should go into it more so looking at it from the perspective that we need to learn to accept other human beings and to help them, as opposed to judging them. Eventually, justice was served. They anonymously put in a tip, and Amani ended up being arrested. They probably shut down Uncle Doug's pedophile ring. So I guess the last character I just want to touch briefly on is Michelle, his future wife. She intrigued him because she wasn't a girl that would just give herself to him right away. But he had plans to go visit California for a while, and he was sort of like, oh yeah, like I might stay there. I don't know if I'll come back. And so she ended up, they ended up making love before he left, and he got her pregnant, and he found that out while he was in California. The friend he met asked his dad if they would be able to sort of help him find a job and get him set up with a visa and stuff, and his dad was like, yeah, absolutely. So he was actually really excited and planning to stay in America to live for a while, but then he gets this call from Michelle's mom, and she's like, are you planning on coming home anytime soon? And he's like, what? Like, he's never met this woman, and she's like, it's just really bizarre that my daughter is here pregnant and you're just off gallivanting in the Americas. Like, it was just really weird. And he's like, what? Like, he didn't know she was pregnant, so he calls her, like, yeah, it's true. And then she's like, are you coming back? He's put on the spot. He's like, I mean, I was just offered like a job and a visa and stuff. And she's like, whatever, screw you, hangs up on him. And so he has a couple minutes to kind of chew on it, and he realizes, like, this is what I've been looking for my entire life. Someone to love, somebody who wants me, somebody who wants to start a family with me. Why would I ever give this up? So he calls her back, and he's like, I'll be on the next flight home. And so he starts a family with this girl named Michelle, and he ends up marrying her and having 3 more kids, and then also adopting the 2 kids that she had from previous relationships. And so his story ends on a pretty high note. He has a woman that he feels is his soulmate, that accepts him. She's the one that encouraged him to like go and leave anonymous tips, so good for her. So good for Joe in the end for turning out a life that was worth living. His family helped him grow and learn what being loved meant, which was awesome. Another awesome thing was he started a helpline for kids who are abused like him. He just has an extra understanding of exactly what happens to abused children. Like, there are things that we just don't understand. For example, I was really shocked by this fact. He said most kids that are in prostitution are sold there by their parents. They're not kidnapped by the pedophiles, they're sold there. That blows my mind. Like, usually I would think that kids would be kidnapped into things like that, and I'm sure that happens as well. But he said the vast majority are sold there, are sold into slavery by their own parents. The fact that he started a helpline and is just like he wrote these books, he's getting awareness out there of the fact that this exists. Not far away in other countries where we feel like we can sort of turn our mind off to it, but here, he seems like he turned into a pretty remarkable guy, standing up for other people who have been through the same as him, and he came around and was able to like share his testimony and use it in order to help others. I would say this book is great. Especially if you read the first book, if you read it and you were feeling discouraged or weighed down after, I definitely recommend reading this one. I'm going to give this book, I'll give it a 9 out of 10. As I sort of shared in the intro to my other video, I don't even know how to rate these books. I don't want to give it a low rating because then I would feel like I wasn't doing his life story justice, but I don't feel like this book deserves a low rating. I don't feel like his writing is awful. I don't feel like any part of it was boring. I learned a lot from these books, so I do give them a 9 out of 10. Now that I read this one, I would recommend the series as a whole. So I don't recommend them separately. If you read the first one, I recommend them together. So if you're gonna read the first one, please read the second one. Do yourself some justice. If you guys read the books, I want to know what you think. I want to know your thoughts on it. I want to know like sort of what you were feeling, what parts you were really shocked by, or if some of your thought processes were changed. So let me know down in the comments, shout me out on Twitter. And yeah, thanks for joining me again today.